Danes are regularly ranked among the world's happiest people, and their happiness is often attributed to equality, high social trust, and welfare services. But can their upbringing explain why they are so happy? Well, my guest today believes it can, and she has written a book explaining Danish parenting and often comparing it with parenting in the US. Jessica Joelle Alexander is the best selling author of The Danish Way of Parenting. She's also a cultural researcher. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, BBC, and Wall Street Journal, among others. Her books have been published in more than 32 countries. Today, I will talk to her about the Danish theory of raising confident, capable, and happy kids. Jessica, a very warm welcome to the program and thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Nice to be here.
Okay. So before we start our discussion based on your book that you have written about the Danish parenting, I want to know the backstory. So you are not a motherly person, and surprisingly, that made you very interested in the Danish way of parenting. So can you tell us more about how it all happened?
Yes. So I was not what you would call a maternal person, let's say. And I was quite terrified about the idea of having children. I wasn't even sure. I didn't know. I knew I wanted kids, but I didn't know when. And fortunately, I was married to a Dane, and I went to Denmark, and I saw Danish children, and my mind started changing because the Danish children were so happy and serene and well behaved, and I didn't hear any screaming or yelling or, it was very interesting. And I think I started studying, children and parenting already 20 years ago, because I really thought the kids were different. And so I began like watching the parents and how they were interacting, and it really was very different than American parenting. And I lived in different countries. I lived in Italy. I lived all kinds of different places, and it was just very different in Denmark. And it wasn't until I actually had kids that I realized that I wanted to use the Danish model, because I was hoping that if I parented like the Danish model, I would have happy kids, right? It kind of started, really began because I observed how differently I think the whole interaction and relationship was in Denmark.
Yeah, I understand. And also you're fortunate in the sense that you married a Dane. So that actually came as a benefit because you were exposed to the Danish culture. And I also read somewhere on the internet that you speak fluent Danish, right?
Yeah. Yes. But I mean, that came over time. that came with love and a long time. But it helped me also understand the culture. The more I understood the language, the more you understand all the nuances of parenting. And that's what helped me kind of make the bridge in English for other people to understand, because I feel like Denmark is such a small country and it's kind of a difficult language. So I felt like all these secrets were locked inside. And when I discovered them, it was like a treasure box that I wanted to kind of share
with the world.
Yeah, and with other parents, I think who struggle a lot. I mean, I think the Danish model is very, very simple, and I think that many places, especially America, we overcomplicate
a lot of things
parenting.
about parenting.
A lot of things. Yes, a lot of things.
Yeah, I understand. So let's jump right into your book. I'm quoting you because I've been reading the book for like 2 weeks, and I really liked it. And actually, it helped me to reflect on my own childhood. And I was never happy with the Bangladeshi style of parenting. And when I was reading your book, it put me in a state of nostalgia. And I remembered my days as a kid in Bangladesh. So I thought, okay, I can see the world of parenting from a different lens. Well, I was living in Finland, and parenting in Finland is also in other Nordic countries.
Similar,
They're pretty similar. They're pretty similar. So
very similar. Yeah.
yeah, they're pretty similar. So they are actually valuing some things that maybe in other cultures we don't even pay attention to those things, but in Denmark and also in other Nordic countries they actually put a lot of emphasis on those characteristics or traits or the ways that they employ to raise their kids. So before we start discussing from your book, I want to quote you directly because I liked this a lot. So you wrote, the Danish way of raising children yields some pretty powerful results. Resilient, emotionally secure, happy kids who turn into resilient, emotionally secure, happy adults who then repeat this powerful parenting style with their own kids. And the legacy repeats itself. And then I understood, actually, I was checking the happiness statistics in the World Happiness Report. So the first World Happiness Report came out in 2012. So that's like 10 years ago from now. But from your book, I came to learn that the OECD, they have been actually
Mhm.
ranking Denmark as the happiest country for like almost 40 years or something like that, as you wrote in your book. And I was like, oh my God, wow,
Yep.
40
Yep.
years in a
Yep.
row. Can
Yep.
you
Yeah.
can you
Yes.
imagine? So definitely
No,
you can.
and that's why, that was the day that I got the idea for the book. I had been using the Danish model for years already with my two kids, and then I read in the newspaper that Denmark was voted the happiest country, and I didn't know that. And because Danes are so humble, also they don't talk about it. But then I thought, wow, as an American, this was really interesting because we're kind of obsessed with happiness. And then when I looked into it and researched and found that for more than 40 years, they're topping the happiness charts. I couldn't believe no one had really explored it even more, because we're so obsessed with measurements, we're obsessed with grades, we're obsessed with, you know, and for me, this was like such an obvious indicator that what they're doing is working, you know. Um, and I just want to say about how you said that it made you reflect on your own childhood. Actually, I think one of the reasons that the book has been popular is because I don't feel it's just a parenting book. I think it's also really about reflecting who you are as a person and like our values and how we're raised, and especially the cultural influence that so many of us don't even realize we have. There's so much, we have such a huge effect from our own culture on how we see the world, on how we view what's right and what's wrong and what's good and what's bad. So I think it's resonated a lot across the globe because there's people going, wait a minute, wow, yeah, my parents really affected me, and so did my culture. And how do I want to be? What do I want to think is the right way? What do I really believe is the right? Many people don't haven't ever thought about, because I was sold the American dream. I grew up thinking what I was supposed to think, and believing what I was supposed to believe was the way to success and happiness. And then suddenly I'm confronted with this completely different culture by chance that I married a Dane, and my whole world turns upside down, and I go, oh my gosh, maybe it's not the right way,
maybe maybe
right?
th-
And I,
maybe
so
there
I
is a better way.
maybe there is another way that
Yeah,
might be
exactly.
better. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, so to establish your theory of parenting in the book, you used the acronym PARENT. So that stands for play, authenticity, reframing, empathy, no ultimatums, togetherness. So let's start with play first. So you have discussed the role of play in building resilience in kids, and how resilience can help kids become successful when they become adults. So, if you can talk about that.
You know, it's exactly the same in Finland. I think Finland is even maybe better than the Danes in this. You know, it's just this idea that play is so sacred. So, you know, I remember I used to ask my husband what he did when he was growing up, and I meant like, you know, did you do karate? Did you play the piano? Did you do violin? Did you know, learn coding? Did you? And he said, I played. And I felt like he didn't understand what I was asking. I was like, yeah, you played, but you know, what did you do? Right. And it took me a long time to understand that in Denmark and Finland and the Scandinavian countries, play is just considered the most important thing that a child can do. And that's because it's teaching so many things that you can't measure, like empathy, negotiation skills, resilience. It's building an internal locus of control, which means that you have control over your life. You decide what you want to do. You decide how much fear you can handle in a game. You create. And all of these things are building more self-esteem, because your growth is it's much more based on your own vision of the world rather than an adult's. So it's not about an adult praising you, an adult giving you a trophy, an adult telling you what you're supposed to do and perform and measure. And I think often in America and maybe, you know, where you were raised, in many cultures, love is so often associated with performance. And we don't do it on purpose. It's just that's what our culture kind of tells us we're supposed to do. And I think in the Scandinavian countries, especially with parenting, they really want their kids to know that they're loved just for who they are and for being. And I think play is one of those big areas where they hold it sacred. I think childhood is sacred. You know, I was just thinking the other day, we were at this family camp in Denmark, and I was looking at the kids and I thought, my God, you know, childhood should be a UNESCO heritage protected, because it's like, it's so innocent and it's so wonderful. And there's so much creativity that comes from a child who's just allowed to play in nature, you know, with few toys. And again, I think in some of our where we're complicating things in America, for example, it's just become very commercial. Everything is about selling something, or how much more can I educate my child? They can't just play. They have to learn numbers, and they have to learn letters, and they have to perform, you know? And I think that this is actually somehow also taking away some of the childhood. And again, I actually, one of the really interesting things about the Scandinavian countries is that things like play and some of the other things I talk about in my book, they've never gone out of style. So if you look in other countries, there's always like a fad, like a new fad. There's like baby Einstein, and then, you know, this new thing, and, you know, block building class for Harvard. And, you know, it's, whereas there it's like, we believe play is the best thing for children. It's an educational theory. It's the best way that children learn. It's the most effective way that they learn. It builds self-esteem. It builds many other factors rather than just academics. It kind of gives you the platform to become a human.
Yeah, I think
So
I think that's a beautiful way to put it. It gives you an avenue, a way, so that you can become a human. And
yeah.
as you said, that our love sometimes, I mean, it happens naturally. We don't do it on purpose. So love happens. Love is related with performance. So we
Mhm.
sometimes impose it on our children. So we say, if you perform well, I will love you more. it goes often like this.
Yes,
but
yes,
but
yes.
but if you just think about the negative psychological impacts that can have on a child's mind, like the children will then always be interested in raising his performance. He will always be concerned and worried about his performance rather than engaging in free play and building social skills and this kind of things and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I can perfectly relate to my childhood when you say, because in Bangladesh it's also almost like this, like parents, I mean, they don't do it, as I said, they don't do it on purpose. maybe
Right, right.
maybe they're just following how they were raised by their
Yeah,
parents
of course,
back in
of
those days.
course.
Yeah, so that's
Yeah,
that's
and it was
that's
a
also a
cultural
different
norm.
kind of legacy. That's also a different
Right,
kind of
right, and
legacy.
that's yeah, yeah, and they were doing their best, and they wanted the best for us. So it's like, they're not doing it. They're doing it also because it's a cultural norm to do it, and it's never done out of harm, but it is very interesting. This is what I mean about the book in terms of thinking about yourself as a person, right? Like, I realized as an adult how many of these things were affecting me today. Like that doesn't define me. Whether I get that thing or that thing doesn't define me. This is still coming from that belief when I was little that if I didn't get that grade, I wouldn't be loved. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And the
yeah.
other thing, what's interesting is that it's not just about the praise. It's also like there's so many parents that feel like letting their kids play is a lazy choice, right? There's many parents, many cultures where they would feel like, they'd be embarrassed if they were just allowing their kids to play. That's not good parenting. Good parents have their kids learning,
Yeah, exactly.
right?
Exactly. I agree with you. And you said in Denmark there is a whole child approach when it comes to parenting. And I want to quote you again because I loved these lines so much in your book. You wrote that in Denmark there's not a sole emphasis on education or sports, but rather on the whole child. Parents and teachers focus on things like socialization, autonomy, cohesion, democracy, and self-esteem. They want their children to learn resilience and develop a strong internal compass to guide them through life. And you can actually ensure these values through free play. If you're allowing children to, play freely, I mean, the way they want, instead of imposing an arranged activity on them. So I think that actually helps them a lot, and that actually helps them to, develop these kind of skills like socialization, autonomy, cohesion, democracy. So I
Yeah, and I
really,
mean, of course, like there has to be some good values like around it. It's not that they don't need scaffolding,
mm,
as we call it, um, from adults around the play. But so often kids are learning so many things from working out their own. They want to play. It's innate in children. That children play in war zones. It's what they do. It's look at animals. Animals play, right? It's like it's part of, uh, and so they learn so much from working out their own problems. If we want to intervene many times and save them and protect them and stuff, but there's just so many things they're learning from that experience. But that doesn't mean we don't have all these other values around it. Like, we value empathy, we value honesty, right? We value these kinds of things. I mean, that's also important that as adults we give them those values.
yeah, I understand. So let's move on to the next part of the parenting. So it's authenticity. So in that chapter, you mentioned the difference between Hollywood and Danish films. I really liked it so much that the Hollywood films, they want to make you feel good, but the Danish films often do not have a happy ending. So they deal with sad subjects, subjects that involve tragedy or sadness or maybe trauma. So if you can tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think go watch some Danish movies. It's an education. Um, yeah, and it was quite shocking for me that how different they were. And then, but it's also funny that it's also the same in the children's stories. So children's stories are often dark, and not dark, but like honest. in a way, I never had children's stories. I didn't never got children's stories that were this honest. And my first reaction was kind of to protect, like, I was like, oh my God, this is too much. But then I was like, why is it too much? It's just honest. So, I mean, I think that's the difference. It's like Hollywood and Disney. This is all about, let's make life look like a fairy tale. In Denmark, which is actually like the land of the fairy tales. I mean, it's the birthplace of Hans Christian Andersen, who's, the biggest fairy tale writer ever. And yet their fairy tales are nothing like Disney. So I think it's much more celebrating real life. And what real life means. Real life does not mean the prince gets the princess and everybody's happily ever after. That's not really how real life is. And what happens, what the research shows, is that actually when we're a little more just honest about all of life, it helps prepare kids more for life, which makes them more resilient. Because they don't get a shock that, oh, it's not a fairy tale. I think it's it's really sometimes I compare it like colors on a color wheel. So you have all the colors, that make up our world, right? They make our world rich. And if you think of emotions in the same way, you have sadness, terror, happiness, joy, jealous, so many emotions. And yet somehow we're always focused on yellow. Everything's got to be happy. happy, right? Whereas the difference in Denmark, they're focusing on all of the emotions, teaching all of the emotions, and that actually makes life richer.
Yeah.
So it seems, you know what I mean? It seems like contrary, but it's and I think it's a different kind of happiness. Like, I feel like in America, we kind of have this rosy, idea of what super happiness is supposed to look like. And I think there's a kind of peaceful, resting happiness that they're looking for in Denmark. I think that's more like the real goal.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think the same way, because in Finland, it's also the same. Like they say, our happiness is the silent type of happiness, because we are not smiling, we are not showing it on our faces. And, if you meet a Finn on a Finnish street, maybe that Finn will not have a very happy face. But what they have is the contentment that they have inside, because they know their life is good, their life is secure because of the comprehensive welfare services, and also because their social institutions and government institutions function really well.
Yeah,
so they really have a very good life, and they don't have a lot of things to worry about. So that's what actually makes them happy. But anyway, so in the authenticity chapter, you also talked about, and I think this is very important, you talked about the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's just, this is really known now in the parenting world. It's just this idea of when you do praise your children, you praise them for the process, you praise them for the work, you don't praise them for the result, because then kids tend to seek that title, right? Or they stop working hard because they're afraid to lose the title. I'll give you an example. In America, we use the word smart and gifted like 30% more than other countries. So we're kind of obsessed with our kids being smart and gifted. And so it's always, if you listen to some, you'll hear it. And what happens is kids hear this over and over again, and they think they're born smart. They think they're born talented. They think they're born gifted. But we know now with the brain that you learn, you don't ever stop learning. Your brain can always grow. It can always change. So there's no such thing as a fixed thing. There's no such thing as fixed, right? But many kids who are told this, this becomes an identity, and so sometimes if something gets too difficult for them, they either stop doing it because they're afraid it's going to show that, that they're not talented or gifted. Or they even showed, if you read the studies, some kids even cheated in order to keep their, status. right? There's a lot of interesting studies that they've shown how this praise for innate abilities is not ideal for kids. It's much better to just say, look, work hard, try hard, or we're proud of the effort that you're putting into it. And I think in Denmark, humility is such a value, being humble. So this idea of like being the best at something and being the master and being right, they don't have that as much. And I do feel like that also creates this sort of sense of calm and well-being, because there's not this like constant competition about being the best. Actually, I saw one of your interviews with, was it Richard? What's his name? Richard
Lyer.
Yeah, I've quoted him in some of my work, and so I watched that interview.
Okay.
And I liked the example he uses about the flowers, and like being a zero-sum game. Do you remember?
Yeah, of course. Of course. The race. He says the race for status is always a zero-sum game, because if someone is winning, someone else is losing. So there's no point in playing this game.
No, exactly. So it's just basically about being more aware of instead of saying, wow, you're such an amazing artist, being more interested in what's actually going on with the child. So, why did you choose those colors? Or what were you thinking when you drew this picture? This is so much more about the child's experience rather than giving them a label. Do you know what I mean? We're too quick to give these labels about, oh, you're the best, you're awesome, you're an art, rather than just being interested in what they're doing, which is what's building that self-esteem, which is building that my mom is interested in me for how I'm thinking and feeling. She's not interested in me because I'm performing and being an awesome artist.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. I completely understand. So I again want to quote you from your book, because I have all these quotes written here in this paper. I love them so much. So you wrote, we think telling kids how smart they are boosts their confidence, but in the face of difficulty, it actually makes them lose confidence. Praising students for their intelligence doesn't give them the motivation or resilience that is crucial to being successful, but can instead give them a fixed mindset that is full of vulnerability. So I think that actually explains a lot how this fixed mindset versus the growth mindset works. And if you are praising the children for the process and not the result, so that child will always want to focus on the process. Even if you give the child a difficult task, he will actually want to try it. Whereas if someone is having a fixed mindset, so he will say, oh, okay, maybe I can't do it, so I'm not going to even try. So, as an adult, it actually doesn't help you become successful in life, because
it's terrible, because I know, and it's because their whole identity is so tied up in this this idea of being talented and gifted, that they're afraid to lose it. So sometimes, like, well, if I don't try, I didn't fail, I didn't screw up. But let me give you a quick example, which I think is really a wonderful way of describing it. So in Denmark, a lot of times they try to explain the difference between self-confidence and self-esteem to parents, to students even, and they describe it with a picture of a tree. So on the tree, in the foliage, okay, you have like all the things you can do, the things you're good at. So your grades, your performance, your whatever, the things that you can see that you can do, that you're good at. This is what they would say is your self-confidence. Okay, and this is the foliage of the tree. Then in the roots of the tree, this is how you feel about yourself as a person. So this is, your meaningful relationships, how you feel about yourself despite all the things you can do as a person, right? And it's things you can't see. And what happens in so many cultures is that we think that self-esteem and self-confidence are the same thing. So the more things you can do, the more things you have, the more things you can show in your tree, the happier and more confident you are, right? But if you've never nurtured those roots of self-esteem because you think they were all the same, you know what happens when the storm of life comes.
Mm,
That tree falls over
mm,
because it's not a fairy tale. So things happen. We lose our job. We don't get that grade. We don't have success all the time, which is why it's so important to nurture these roots of self-esteem so that you know that no matter what happens, I'm still okay for who I am.
yeah, exactly.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And there's a beautiful expression in Danish, which is, I love it. And it's like my life goal for myself and for my kids. It's at hvile i sig selv, and it means to rest well within yourself. And this is such a big, it's something they really value in a character as your character, and it's something they really try to influence, that no matter what, I rest well within myself. That I don't need validation to feel okay. Of course, validation is nice, and of course, we all want to be good at things, and that's fine. But it's important to keep a balance with the roots and the foliage. And I love that, because in so many every culture I know of, they're both considered the same. Like, be better at this, and you're going to feel better as a person. Have more money, or do all these things, and it's going to make you better as a person, right? They're kind of different.
Yeah, I understand. So I only have 5 minutes left, and I want to.
It's hard to get through all those letters.
Yeah, I know. Within 30 or 40 minutes, you cannot actually finish discussing the whole acronym. But anyway, the last thing I want to talk to you about is the Hygge.
Hygge. Yes.
Hygge, the Danish one that actually became popular perhaps all across the world because of these happiness reports. So if you can tell us about Hygge and its influence on Danish parenting.
Yeah, I mean, Hygge is also, gosh, it's a big thing, but I'll try to be. Hygge basically means cozy time with your family and friends. Many Danes see it as like a physical thing, so it's always a lot of candles, nice food, cozy atmosphere. But having studied the Danish culture for like 20 plus years, it's a psychological space. So Hygge is like a psychological space that you create with your family. Let's start with your family, and you decide for periods of time that this time is going to be sacred and it's going to be time for us. And the way I describe it is like, you have to imagine that like you're walking into a room, right? And you, just like you would take off your hat and your coat and your shoes, you take off your negativity, your stress, your complaining, bragging, controversial discussions. It's about being together in a space where you don't have things that divide you. And all of those things that I just said are subtly divisive. So controversial discussions, someone, not helping out, is everybody helps out, for example, with food as well. So it's much a team effort. And what it is it's like, it's kind of like an oasis from the everyday stuff, because you can always complain about work. You can always, gossip about the family. You can be negative in any other time. But for the Hygge space, it's like making this very sacred time where it's about connecting with the people you love. And it sounds really simple, but if you're not Danish, you have to actually be aware of this. I don't know if you saw in the book, there was a Hygge oath. I usually have one here, but it's like, it was a way to help people kind of go over some of the things that it helps to do to create these moments. And the way that I describe it is, you've heard of mindfulness, right? Mindfulness, yes. And we know that mindfulness is improving well-being. And basically mindfulness is about being in the moment, being very present, right? I think Danes have evolved mindfulness. And what Hygge for me is we-fulness. So it's being together with the people you love, present in the moment, and, telling nice stories, enjoying the food, being grateful for the people that you love. And it's interesting to see as a non-Dane, because I've used this with my family in America, and it's completely changed our family. You know, Danes do this naturally; they grow up with it, so for them this is easy peasy. You know, but for non-Danes, it takes more awareness. But I promise, you know, anybody who really tries to make this effort, playing games is very hygge. Because if you can play games, you can be in the moment, you enjoy the people you're with, you play, right? And so it becomes a place where hygge is not a place where you come and you brag about how awesome you're doing at work, but it's also not a place you come and complain about how terrible your life is going. You know what I mean? It's like, here, we love you for who you are, and we want to be with you, no matter what.
Yeah.
And what's interesting to see is when you create these hygge times, this is what I've noticed, it's kids love it the most. Because they love being with their families without negativity, without drama. They just love it. And while for us, it's a bit of work because it's not culturally normal for us. If you think about the legacy that it leaves for your own kids, you know, to create these spaces and to want to have these, I think it's really worth the effort.
Yeah, I understand. So, Jessica, I actually wanted to talk to you about the whole acronym, but I'm running out of time.
I know, yeah.
maybe maybe we'll have a second.
Maybe we'll do a follow-up.
Yeah,
we'll have to time the letters.
We'll do a follow-up. So we'll talk about the reframing, empathy, and no ultimatums, the three remaining parts of parenting. But for today, it was really a good discussion, and I enjoyed really talking to you a lot. So maybe we'll have a second program later if I get time. But for today's program, thanks a lot, and thanks for accepting my invitation, and thanks for the interview. I learned a lot.
Thank you. I'm glad you liked the book, and yeah.
I really like the book. I am actually thinking about writing feedback, telling you how I liked your book. So maybe I will.
Please do.
I will send it to you.
Please do. I love hearing it. I mean, I think to me it means a lot when it's, because you can feel where it's from, you know, from the cultural basis, right? And it's so I love feedback.
Yeah. Okay, Jessica.
Okay.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.